Okay, so to start off, could you please tell me a little bit about yourself and then the organization that you work for?
Well, yeah, I'm Tabitha Miles-Kingrey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently the operations supervisor for Oxbow Regional Park. And I work for Metro Regional Government, which is, as far as parks are concerned, it's kind of that layer between city parks and state parks. We operate not just in parks, but in many facets of public service between Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas County, whether it's solid waste or transportation parks. We kind of have a hand spread in many different things to kind of support um, functions across the city and across those three counties, which is pretty fascinating to see what Metro is able to accomplish and still learn to do even better and provide even better services to the public.
That's great, thank you. As a person of color, how have you navigated the predominantly white spaces in the conservation field, and what did you learn through this process?
Still navigating, I would say, quite a bit. Sometimes it feels like a daily, hourly, meeting to meeting navigation. Some days it doesn't. I found that I'm a very direct communicator, and I've learned it's been a slow learning process for me, just because I think because it comes so naturally, just to be a direct communicator, that everyone doesn't do that, and
Mm,
so I've in giving information and also trying to make sure people hear me when I speak, trying to say very clearly and direct, this is something that concerns me. This is something that I've noticed, a trend in the workplace culture, or in the in conservation or in parks in general. And also just doing that in different ways, whether it's directly face to face, whether it's in a meeting, speaking very generically for the group, whether it's in email form, just whenever I can. And I try to always do it evidence-based. So situations that I've seen, situations that I've come across, maybe not the first time, but if I definitely see it repeating itself. And what I've come to learn is a lot of, I would say maybe 90% of the time, people don't realize they're doing it. People
mm,
don't realize that they're navigating from a place of privilege in a white dominant field. And therefore it's hard to see the other perspective of someone who is not, who's a person of color. And it's just sometimes it hits people like an 18-wheeler when you say it. And I'm like, oh, that's not even that groundbreaking. Why are you so shocked?
right.
you know, and trying to be patient and trying to be open to those conversations, which is not always easy, because you're trying to just have that conversation with someone and not try and think, down the road on how they process or how they think or how they function. You're just like, let me just focus on this. Some days it's easy, some days it's not.
What barriers have you encountered regarding working in this field, and how do you move past these?
I think I've come to laugh at it now. In my first 6 months or so, I found, well, first year, I found it very frustrating. I would almost get a daily question of, do you work here?
Oh
Like that
no.
question. I mean, I usually wear a shirt like this. I have a
Oh,
walkie-talkie on my hip and keys, for all the locks that are in the park. And I want to say, no, I just hike like this. This is just how I look when I hike. um, but I'll be in Fred Meyer's or Walmart or somewhere and someone say, hey, do you know where such and such is? I'm like, I don't work here. It's sometimes people not expecting to see a face in a place or in a role.
mm,
Um, and so sometimes that's on a daily aspect. So I counter that often, and I try and just let it roll off my back and say, yeah, I work here, and can I help you, and keep going. But more high level things that you've encountered, I think definitely, like I was saying before, the lack of awareness and exposure. Um, I feel like I'm originally from Louisiana, and it's far more diverse in the, not only in the people of color to um, in society, but also I feel like because of the long term living together, cohabitating together,
mm,
going through problematic history together, being willing to have open conversations together. It's not perfect, but I found it far easier to have those conversations back home than here. And I think it's just because people haven't had a lot of exposure to different communities, different people of color, and those varying experiences because we're not a monolith. And so trying to move past them is having those days when it's really difficult, just having my moment, being very angry, being very frustrating, screaming, crying, yelling, you know, venting, and then going, okay, what am I going to do about it? How can I address this? How can I address it with this person? How can I address it with many people? Do I feel like I can address it today and stay professional? Not, you know, um, and so sometimes I take a couple of days because I know I can't, you know, because the goal is to be heard, not to just say something. And
Right.
that is a difficult line to walk. How do I make sure you hear me, even though what I'm saying is extremely important, versus me just saying it? We got to have other conversations first before we can have the conversation about the problem. And you know that puts you in the teacher role or the educator role in a conversation, and I can't tell you how uncomfortable that made me at times. And so just trying to, you know, navigate, how do I have those conversations and get people, like I said, to hear you.
How does being Black and part of the LGBTQ plus community influence your perspectives on environmentalism? What are some of the most important things you have learned as a result of your complex and multifaceted identity?
Oh man, that's a book probably.
That's a big question.
Oh, the intersectionality of being Black and queer is fascinating. It's interesting, I guess, because yeah, you can be in conversation with people and notice multiple red flags, no, multiple red flags in my own thinking of
Mhm.
times, because we all kind of function under this white dominant or white supremacist culture that we're deprogramming ourselves from, uh, as we try and move forward with racial equity and in inclusion in general. But I think what I've learned the most from that is it makes you an asset, even if you don't feel like an asset all the time. You are, uh, and because you are being very honest with yourself and honest about who you are. Sometimes that scares people. Sometimes it makes people want to, you know, work on your team and be around you. It has its pros and cons, and hopefully the pros outweigh the cons. And it's all about, how do I look at a situation and how do I stay positive in that situation. But just like behind me, if you can see it, we try and keep up our LGBT, our queer flags up all the time,
Right.
because not just in June, because it's so important, especially in these spaces where, like, I, as a person of color, just had a hard time feeling comfortable in the woods.
Mhm.
It wasn't something that I grew up doing. Like, the swamps are different to me. Like,
Yeah.
it's a different feeling. My my I came across the woods in cinema. It was this the horror movies. Like, that was my introduction to
Yeah.
being out in the woods on a trail by yourself. So when people talked about just hiking and being at peace and being comfortable, I just was like, no, I don't feel that way.
Mhm.
I thought the park Oxbow is beautiful. It is a beautiful park, but I still have moments where I'm out there by myself and I'm just feeling a little uncomfortable. And I run the whole park.
Is there anything that other specifically, um, I don't know, maybe allies or non-Black people, is there anything that we can do to help make Black people or any BIPOC people in general more comfortable in the outdoors?
Mm, yeah, I think so. I think it's going to take time. And that was something I didn't want to accept when I took this position, was because it was a focus in my job interview, is how do we encourage BIPOC people to use parks more often. And I was like, you can't for generations say you're not welcome and then suddenly say you're welcome and expect people to be open and forgiving and trusting, right? It takes time to build trust. But I think basic level is invite your friends out and just say, hey, I'm going on a hike. Do you want to come? You know, um, and I think also, and this wasn't my concept, it was a concept that was told to me, was trying to exchange time for experience. So if I ask you to do a new experience and you don't have a lot of basis of what that experience entails, except negative visualizations,
Right.
how do I explain to you a positive? Right. So just saying, oh, we can go on a hike and be out in nature. What does that mean? Like I can literally think of a question mark at the end of that sentence or a dot dot dot. I can draw a blank. But if you show someone pictures and it's like, hey, this is what the park looks like. This is where they have, you know, emergency phones in the park just in case something happens. Especially if you come to Oxbow, no phones work in the park. So I tell people that on the phone. I'm like, hey, just so you know, your cell phone doesn't work. So plan ahead. Because I have literally talked to people who are panicking because their cell phone doesn't work. And it's not just because they're trying to get to their friend group. It's just they feel very unsafe at this moment.
Right.
So how do I get you to picture your experience before you have it so that you and yourself can quantify that it's worth it? And that's on a basic level. But as you go higher up on it, I think we have to be careful with how we explain things. Because one question is that, and I ask a lot of job interviews, is how would you encourage people of color to enjoy our parks? And
Right.
people say those words of just like, oh, we just need to show them that it's worth it. Everyone knows nature is worth it. Everyone knows it's worth it. How do I get it to translate to your experience? That how is this going to make my day better and my life better? When I'm facing other problems and other situations. And like I tell people, it's a place where for a moment you can potentially pause those things and just reset. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't cure the problem, but you can give yourself a mental break. You don't have to continue to cope for these 15 minutes while you're on this hike. You
Right.
can just be yourself and be in this moment in this hike and reset. So maybe you can continue that fight when you leave.
We were talking a little bit about your interactions with the public, but if you could give me a sense of how much you directly interact with the public, as I
Mm,
know it changes seasonally,
mm.
and have these interactions or conversations changed over the last few years?
Oh gosh, definitely. Just from when I started 2.5 years ago, the conversations have changed. So in the summer months, mainly between May and September, I interact with the public almost on a daily basis. Whether it's up here at the Welcome Center, I'm sorry, at the booth, the entrance booth, just talking to people, telling them about water safety, uh, suggesting trails and interactions. They don't know I'm the supervisor. I'm just someone standing at the booth.
Right.
It's a really great chance to get feedback on experiences and to establish that connection before someone goes in the park. But it's definitely changed since the beginning of 2020 and George Floyd's murder has changed people's awareness and interaction. But yeah, people have just come up to me and instead of saying, do you work here? It's like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? I'm like, yeah, sure. They're like, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I'm the operations supervisor. And they're like, oh, okay, great. I just want to say it's great to see you out here.
Yeah.
Okay. Great to see you too, buddy. And I appreciate that. And the number of people who have come, and whether it's a piece of cardboard or sticker or an official label with Black Lives Matter on it, I think they take a bit of a risk putting that on their vehicle, and some people know that depending on where they live, and they
Right.
do it anyway. And we put our Black Lives Matter banner up on our building just because unfortunately these flags on our booth get vandalized all the time. And so I was like, well, if they keep getting vandalized, I'll just keep replacing them. But one of my rangers actually had the idea of what if we just get a really big one and put it on the building, 2 stories up. So they really have to work for it if they
Right.
want to vandalize it. And so we put our queer flags, the American flag, and our Black Lives Matter banner. And we've gotten so many comments on them, all positive about having them up. Just people saying, I feel safe here, I feel welcomed here. And that's the goal, for people to know that. And I can say that as long as I'm until I'm blue in the face, but when you see that and when you see people engaging with you in a different way, you feel it, and that's the lasting difference to me versus just words.
Could you speak a little on how you strive to create equitable, diverse, and inclusive environments through your work and the benefits you've seen through this process? I know the banners and flags is one way, but if you could speak on anything else.
Internally in Metro, we have our Indigenous community liaison, Isabel, who works with Indigenous community
Mm,
members to have access to the space. So there's quite a bit of coordination between operations and her to make sure that Indigenous community members are not only accessing the space the way that they need to, but in a way that they feel comfortable. So sometimes that is, we don't really want to see enforcement staff. And I'm like, great, you don't need to see us unless, there's an issue. And I try to flag what may be a potential issue before they even arrive.
right.
Sometimes they're like, yeah, we would love a ranger to come and talk to us, tell us about the park, what they do here. And I'm like, fantastic. I'm like, who wants to go? And one of the rangers will go down and have that conversation. We also work with Tara with our community partnership grants and funds. So that's a bit of coordination. And a group is coming to do a certain activity that may not fit within the rules, but they've been sanctioned to do it via that community partnership to build that relationship, especially with marginalized communities. And it's sometimes just showing up and being like, hey, I work here and I look like this. Let me tell you what that's like. Let me tell you how I ended up working here, and things like that. And it's also, seeing kids get off a bus and they're like, wait a minute, where are we? I knew we were going to a park, but I have not been to a park like this. And just saying, hey, we feel a little uncomfortable right now, and that's okay. I feel uncomfortable sometimes, and I'm here every day.
Yeah.
This is what I do, and then slowly, having those conversations with people, and it's really impactful to see people decompress in a matter of about an hour. They'll come and start to decompress, and you see their interaction change with you, with others, and with the space. And it's powerful. And to get emails from people and say, hey, we came with community partnership group, and then we came back and camped, and my kid caught his first fish, and you're just like, oh,
Oh.
come on, that's just like, that's what makes you keep going, and you just keep fighting. So
What advice would you give to a young person of color seeking to enter the conservation field?
hmm, what advice would I give? Oh man, again, a book of advice. But if I had to shorten it, I would say that it's not always fair, it's not always right. But you stay fair and you stay right by continuing to do what has to be done in order to make space for people, to make space for yourself. Don't be afraid to make space for yourself. And if you end up, hitting a wall and not being able to make that space, then this may not be the place for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But don't, because if you aren't able to make that space, you tend to make yourself quiet, and you tend to then disappear and fall into the work culture that's there. And that sometimes is a constant battle of not wanting to meld into that culture because it's not functioning. Uh, Probably for anyone. Well, I feel like everyone doesn't benefit sometimes from a very toxic work culture, even though it seems like others thrive in it, they're still not doing well in it at the end of the day. Um, so yeah, just continue to fight and do what's right, because it has to get done. And you want to go home knowing that you did everything you can to make that place that you're working in a better space, and the field a better space, because the field has been lacking our voice for so long. And I think it starts to bother me when people say, well, nothing's working and nothing's right in society and the world's falling apart and things like that. I'm like, society has excluded a huge part of the world's voice.
Yeah.
I was like, we're not falling apart and doing, it can be so much better if we not only listen to people of color, listen to women, like think
Yeah.
about how much population of the world that is, that's voice ideas, suggestions, abilities that have been squashed. We'll be okay if we start listening to each other and working together. because there's so much potential we haven't even tapped into yet. And so when people started to feel kind of doom and gloom about the world, I'm like, there is some horrible things happening, but man, we have so much power and so much potential we haven't even begun to look into yet. So, you know, unlock that potential in yourself and keep pushing.
Wow, that was great advice. Thank you. That question's like also for myself a little bit too. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yes. Are there opportunities in our fight against climate change to challenge and address some of the historic and underlying problems with the environmental movement?
Oh God, yes. Yes, yes, yes. I in I'm from Louisiana and I'm from Baton Rouge. And in Baton Rouge, there's a place called Cancer Alley. That's where I grew up. And ExxonMobil plant is like what 5, 6 blocks from my house where I grew up. And so you can come out, walk down the street. You're standing at Plank Road, down looking down Mohegan. You're looking right at it. And the number of people who have died from respiratory issues and cancer in that area, mainly Black and Brown people, the numbers are through the roof.
Right.
And when we look at environmental justice, it's easy to still make the mistakes I think people did in the sake of progress in capitalism. And that is, if you're not poor, if you're not rich, you're not a part of the conversation. And if you're not a resource in the conversation, you don't matter. There has to be, I think, in order to build trust and to really push racial justice in this, there has to be healing. That doesn't mean that you just move on to the next thing and keep pushing forward for the sake of progress, which I know we have to do because it does feel like we're running out of time when it comes
Yeah.
to our environment, and it's such a pressing issue. But to make sure you have as many people on board, you have to go back and heal, and you have to go back and build that relationship and that trust, or you're forever going to be pushing along without those people. And those people are a great help. Everyone needs to help in this situation and in this crisis. Um, so I feel that, and I don't know, I really wish I knew how that could look. I really draw blanks when I think about how do you expedite something, but also go back and heal and include people who have not been included and have been harmed from the conversation. I don't know what that looks like, but that to me is an underlying issue that we want to push forward, and we want everyone to be on board because it's a problem that affects us all, which is 100% true. But we don't want to go and say that this was a huge mistake or this was a huge problem. And I'm sure Cancer Alley is only one of many, many, many examples of this. Why either people have been affected by their health, they've been displaced, just being displaced for some people multiple times for the sake of progress in the sense of that. So I don't know what that solution looks like, but I know that unless we heal from what we've done before, we're not going to get everyone on board to move forward.